As Heather told you, Geri and I have been married for 35 years, have 2 kids, 1 and working on 2 grandchildren. But in a sense, that's just a hint of what family life has come to mean for us. I remember 36 years ago when Geri said, "I want to take you home to meet my father and my family." I'm like, how bad can that be? And then I met her 8 living brothers and sisters, their 4 spouses, and the 6 grandchildren, and all the aunts and uncles. And it was a very Catholic family, so the whole yard was full to overflowing. And now, 36 years later, from that first time I met her family, her parents are gone, but now there's 7 of us spouses. There's 41 grandchildren, 9 of whom are not married but are in prime age for it. So we'll probably add some more soon. And 14 great-grandchildren, 2 down, including the one that's coming. So when we all are together, there's 76 of us. And that doesn't happen often, but when I look around that group of the 76 of us, everything that you're going to talk about every night this week is going to be talked about. Loss, addictions and recovery, death, transition. All of these things have happened over the course of those times. And so we're going to let those really smart oblates talk about all those other things, and we're just going to hone in on family itself.
So I'm going to start out the homily reflection tonight by talking about that first reading, and in particular talking about the topic of expectation, and more particularly unrealistic expectation. So we hear that beautiful reading of what the relationship between parents and children is supposed to look like. It's a perfect description of a relationship between children and their parents. It's not the description that we would describe with our children, because it would be unrealistic to think that our children could live perfectly that relationship, because we're not perfect. They're not perfect, and we're not perfect. From the beginning of time, people have not been perfect. It's not just a product of the culture that we live in that kids don't meet the expectations of their children. Our brothers and sisters don't meet other brothers and sisters' expectation. We hear in the prodigal son, the younger son who demanded the inheritance of his father, obviously was not meeting the expectation of the father and of the culture. There's very distinct laws about how you handed down inheritance, wealth, and property. And the son had no regard, no respect for that law, and no respect for his father. So this isn't something that's just happened, that's for sure. I think that in today's terms, it would be kind of like saying, I would rather see you dead because you're getting in the way of my fun and you're getting in the way of my life. Now, our children have never come to us and asked for their inheritance, mainly because there's not much there, okay? They wouldn't get much. But they have demanded things from us and asked for things that we would never expect for them to do and disrespected us. But it's because they're not perfect, and neither are we. So the important thing to remember in families is to think about your expectations. Are they unrealistic, or are they false expectations? Because unrealistic expectations cause a lot of pain and struggle and frustrations in families. We're not perfect people. So the mercy in this is to let it go. The mercy is to let go of our unrealistic expectations for each other and to accept each other as we are.
I would have thought that I've always believed that Geri was perfect, and so as we would hang out with her brothers and sisters, and especially with her parents when they were both still with us, stories would creep out of certain of the 3 little girls climbing down the downspout after she came in for curfew, And there may have been a couple of other things that we're not going to really talk about here, but I suspect that as perfect as she is, if she had that many flaws, for me to expect our kids to be is probably a stretch. As we talk about the prodigal son, we're going to talk about some things maybe from a little bit different standpoint than we normally do when we hear this every 3 years in church. I want to talk about the fact that, you notice when this younger son came to the father, he said fine. He accepted where that son was in his journey. It wasn't where he wanted him to be. It's not where society would have expected him to be, but it's where the younger son was. And likewise, this older son, he has just got a serious chip on his shoulder when his brother comes back, but that's where he was at the time. I think it's important that we try to always accept people where they're at in their journey, whether it's their faith journey or their life journey in general. To use an example from when I first met Geri, Geri saw me playing piano in church at our college church. You know where this is going. And I'm very slow. I did not catch that not only did she come to church, but she came to my fraternity house. She stalked me on the streets. I would see her on campus for a year and a half. I was thinking maybe I was supposed to be celibate, and she obviously knew that I was wrong in figuring that. And so over the course of time, she just accepted where I was at and that it was going to take me some time to realize what was standing in front of me, the great gift that God had put right smack dab in my path, in a sense as an answer to some of my prayers. And so if she hadn't accepted that I wasn't where she was at, she would have moved on. We wouldn't have the life that we have, these children, grandchildren, the ministry that we have together. It just wouldn't have happened if she hadn't been so patient until finally the light bulb came on. Likewise, when I talk to people, and Geri's kind of the same way, probably the greatest place where we struggle with people wanting them to be at a different place on their journey is, I suspect, looking at the age of the crowd, if I asked how many of you struggle with the fact that our children don't go to church as much as we think they would. Don't raise your hand. You're not alone. If I had $1 for every time somebody stopped me in the grocery store or after Mass saying, my kids don't come to church, Deacon, what should I do? And I'm like, how would I know? My kids are not as faithful as I'd like them to be either. And it's really brutal when you're the deacon in the parish and your kids don't show up every week. But it's not where they're at in their journey. But as we meet people in their journey, part of that is being respectful of where they're at. Not hammering them. I've tried that, and just for the record, that one doesn't work. Complaining and whining continuously, not going to get you there. But always making sure that the door's open so that when they do get to that point where they're ready, you can meet them along the path and help them along. But until they're ready to go there, you can't drag them kicking and screaming. Once they hit teenage, the kicking and screaming gets really loud and it's distracting to the other people in church. So don't do that. Meet them where they're at. And the mercy in that is that you're always there with your arms open. And you're showing them that the church is always there with her arms open by the way you treat them. And so the great mercy is that our arms are always open, that we're not complaining and whining, but we have our arms open.
And then to really add on to Doug, meeting people where they are, I wanted to talk a little bit about the concept of two halves of life. Richard Rohr and Ron Rolheiser, our Oblate that we love, we read all their books, they write often about two halves of life. And I think it's really important when we think about mercy in the family, because our children are really from birth, we start in the first half of life. And that half of life is about developing our own identity. It's about really starting to build the ego, to work on things that are kind of our container. The things like, what's my job going to be? How am I going to support myself? Am I going to be married? Who's my friends? What's my family? It's all those I statements. It's a lot about I. It's a lot about building up our own uniqueness in the world and understanding who we are. And that's what they're supposed to do. That's what we're supposed to do in our first half of life. And sometimes we as parents forget that. That's where kids are supposed to be. That's where young adults are supposed to be. But then on the other side, there's the second half of life. And we reach the second half of life when we transition out of the first half of life. And everybody does that at a different time, and some people never do it. It's a gift of mercy. It really is. The second half of life is about holding things in tension that are similar or totally opposite and understanding that it's okay. It's about and both, instead of like in the first half of life, which is about this or that. You see that in the story of the prodigal son. The sons were in their first half of life. It was about them. But the father sitting in the second half of life could extend mercy, to be wise, to just wait with those open arms for his son to come home. I work with our daughter. Matter of fact, she lives in the office next door to me. So we see each other 8 hours a day at the office. She's 31, so she's obviously in her first half of life. Sometimes I think she's harsh. Sometimes I think that she isn't open enough to all of the possibilities in life, because so often she is this or that, or black or white. She thinks that I let people take advantage of me. She thinks I'm too nice. She thinks sometimes I compromise my values because she doesn't know what the second half of life is about, and that's okay. Where we meet our kids is to let them be in the first half of life. The mercy is to let them be and develop into their own people outside of who we are. Our kids are not us. They're on their own journey. They have to develop their own identity. It's what they have to do so that they can transition one day into the second half of life and be wise people that sit on the porch and wait, that hold the opposites in tension, because you know that there is such a thing as and both. It's the wise years, and that's great mercy.
The image that Geri just used is the one that I always have of the father in the prodigal son. We hear that when his son is still a long way off, he runs out to see him. And I guess it's my experience maybe at my grandmother's house, or the dream that Geri and I always had of having a house with a big porch. But I always picture that father at the end of the day, every day, going out and sitting on the front porch, just hoping, just thinking maybe today is the day. As Christians, what we know is that God does not save us from all of those hurtful things in life, that the cross is there in 1,000 different ways, many of which we'll talk about this week. But the great hope that we have is that in God's time, we'll see the blessing in it. We'll see the resurrection that comes with the crosses in our lives. And so that father sitting there every day, he doesn't change his life. He doesn't go running out and searching in the far-off country for his son, but he just patiently waits. He's always there, just hoping. And so the last thing that I'd like for you to take home from this beautiful reading is the mercy of knowing that we are a people of hope. Knowing that as frustrating as it is, God does not work in our time. We have no sense of how many days that dad sat on the front porch and watched and looked at the road and nothing happened. But when the time was right for him, when the time was right in his son's life, great mercy happened. Marvelous things happened that we talk about even after hearing this story year after year for 2,000 years. It's a remarkable thing to know that God's mercy is always going to be there, just not necessarily the way we want it to be or in the time frame that we want it to be, but it's always there. That's why we come here and celebrate God's great mercy in countless ways in our family lives, in the life of this great religious community that means so much to us here in this area, in the parish life that we see from both sides of the river represented here. In all of those marvelous ways, we see that God is always like that Father, waiting for us, hoping for us, and building up the hope in us. In all of these things, as we struggle to meet our children, as we struggle to not have high expectations, let us never lose sight of the great hope. Let us never lose sight of the great mercy that is ours because we're followers of Jesus and we do have hope.